everybody. Good afternoon. We're ready to get started again. We're about 10 minutes late, but hey, that's the theme of the day. So I wanted to introduce to you for our roundtable on legislation, our two legislative representatives that are here today. On the 911 Council board, we have 4 legislative representatives on the board. 2 of our representatives are here. Kyle Hoffman is a representative from Comanche County and represents that area. And then Representative Billinger is from Sherman County, Goodland. So, Bellinger, sorry. So anyway, we're going to kick this off, and I need to run around with the mic. So my colleague Josh had a question that he wanted to start.
Yeah, if you guys just want to stand kind of.
Okay, my name is Josh Macias with Rice County Emergency Communications, and I think I want to start off this roundtable discussion with a 911 issue that I'm dealing with locally. Unfortunately, we have a elderly lady that lives in our community, suffers from Alzheimer's and dementia, and she calls 911 on a regular basis, reporting crimes. Truthfully is, I don't think what current laws we have in place allow us to provide her with the assistance that she needs. Because in her mind, what's happening is truly happening. She's not making a false report to 911. But when we talk about the resources that it's taken, it's my staff members answering multiple calls a night. Not only that, but then it spills over into law enforcement and the response to them, taking them away from some other duties that they may have to be. So what I guess my question is to both the representative and the senator is, well, I guess what are your thoughts on the process of creating some new statutes locally that could, one, aid in a county or local police department or a sheriff's office or a dispatch center to get those type of individuals the assistance that they need, so they're not, I hate to use the word abusing the system, but ultimately that's what's happening. It's an abuse of the system. So I think I'll just start the discussion with there, and I'd also be interested in anybody else's thoughts in the room if you're dealing with any type of other similar issue out there of maybe some abuse or misuse of 911 and how we can look to get those individuals the assistance that they need, so resources are available on a regular basis to those who truly need it. So I don't know if either one of you want to answer that and take a guess at it, but
okay. Of course, there's a lot in that question, and we had a discussion a little bit before we came up here, so we actually knew that question was coming up. So not that we still have an answer for it, but I think one of the things that we need to make sure that we're very careful. We tend to, in the legislature, make decisions kind of, well, something comes up, oh, we got to fix this, we fix it, and then we realize, oh, crud, we just messed up a whole bunch of other stuff. And so, it needs to be really looked at. You had mentioned maybe looking at what some of the other states are doing to look at that. It sounds like it probably gets into mental health a little bit, which mental health is a big issue in our state. It's among teens all the way up to adults. And so I would just say that we welcome, looking at what you might find out or what we could look for as far as what other states are doing. I think that's probably the first thing, unless someone has some ideas of what could be done. But we got to be real careful. We don't want to do something that is going to, start having people fined or whatever, and it's innocent mistakes that they call, or even if it's several times. And I think you understand that. And so, not really a very good answer, but I think it's probably something that we should look at, and probably in mental health. Probably with mental health, most likely, more so than anything.
So I guess a follow-up question to that, where, depending on which side of the house would you offer a recommendation of maybe what committee would be the best to start working that issue in? Is that maybe a committee that's dealing with public safety, or be more on the mental health side? I'm not looking to present something to you in the next few months that says, hey, this is, I think, the route we need to go, because I do agree, I think it needs to take some time. We need to, at least from my perspective, some research needs to be done on what's currently out there. I guess for mine is to reach out to that state. Did this legislation solve your issue, or did it create greater issues for you in the time as well? But I guess when that time arrives, does that start within committee work, or do I look for maybe one of my local senators or representatives to champion that and to be a sponsor of the bill? Or I guess what would be your recommendation?
Well, I'd say probably work with your local representatives or senators. And it is a difficult deal, and I think a lot of this does deal with mental health. And whether you would want to go through that committee or not, I'm not sure which way you'd want to approach it. But I will tell you that last year we put additional dollars in for mental health. We recognize that this is a tremendous issue that you guys deal with every day. And I and Kyle want to first and foremost thank all of you for what you do. And Kyle and I do support you guys. We support you guys, law enforcement, police, fire. The jobs you guys do, it's tremendous. And our state is very proud to have you representing us. And the 911, the portals, everything. We're top notch here, and that's because of you folks, so thank you.
And I'll just reiterate that it's because of you guys that someone, and this is regional, right? Is this a statewide meeting, or is this regional?
Statewide.
Oh, this is statewide, so there may be some Johnson County people, but probably not. Someone from Johnson County can be flying across I-70 and in Colby, Kansas, have a wreck or anything, and they can get 911 service just like they can in Kansas City, and that's not the case in a lot of issues, or a lot of things that happen. And so it's because of you guys, it's because of what the state has done with 911, but ultimately it's because of you guys that are taking those calls. So thank you.
Several years ago, we had the same issue, and when our deputies did, whether it was right, wrong, or otherwise, they started an adult in need care case and got DCF involved and got them the help that they needed, mental health wise, and things like that. I don't know if that could be an option for you guys to help out, but we also have the same problem.
Was it voluntary or involuntary? Because I think that's what our law enforcement ran into, whether that was an involuntary assessment or an involuntary.
Well, DCF made it an involuntary assessment because there was a need for them to have that adult protective services come in and assess the situation and make an opinion. So I don't know if that would help, but that's what we did.
Yeah, ours didn't have any family that would take care of her or
Anything like that. And dilapidated housing and things like that, but her mental health was going on how fast, and we had the same issue where she was calling 5, 6, 7 times a day. 191, so.
You might even want to check, I think your idea first of all was see what's going on in other states, because I guarantee you there's other folks that have had the same issue, and there's probably a good way to handle it. May not even take legislation.
I think the challenge is you're going to have to show, in order to do anything involuntary, you're going to have to show she's a danger to herself or others. And if all she's doing is calling 911 and reporting funky things, how do you make that nexus between a danger to herself or others and her conduct? So.
My question is, when she calls, does she want an officer to come out? Or is that just your procedure that because she called and she's calling her? And I only ask that because, I could give you so much data on a frequent flyer that we have. We actually use common names, and we just type in Shotwell, and it puts in her address, and how many times she called. But she'll call in things that you know is not happening, being beamed in the head, etc. with, rape and stuff. But our agency has just allowed us to ask her simply, do you need an officer, fire truck, or ambulance? And if she would tell us no, then we're done listening to her, because it's not a service that we can provide to her any longer. Because she will call and keep you on the phone, and other real emergencies are ringing because you can't hang up with her. I guess my question was just, does she always want an officer, or is that just your procedure?
Lately, no, she has not wanted an officer, because typically then, that officer, I can't say I'm not in the field responding with him. But unfortunately, I guess from my center perspective is, one is, we never know when that's gonna be a real call. And so, at least for my staff's protection liability-wise, is she calls, requests that says, hey, somebody's been in my house, or somebody's moved my vehicle again. And, law enforcement doesn't think as far as marking their tires, tracking where it's at, there's been no movement, but we still send them out there with that, so.
We ran into where, when she was wanting an officer, even by the time the officer got there, wasting their time, she wanted to talk to him through the window.
I definitely don't want to dig deep in the weeds, because I appreciate that our legislators have given us an hour of their time, and I want to make that our focus. But the only thing I wanted to add is, this isn't going to solve your issue of her calling. But I think it's real important for all public safety, including dispatchers, to have a heightened awareness and education when it comes to dealing with somebody who suffers from mental illness or, any one of these, dementia or whatever. And so we train with our local mental health. All of our staff takes an 8-hour mental health first aid class, which helps us to learn how to communicate effectively, so that you're not offensive to the person that may have the illness, but also how to kind of guide those conversations when they do go kind of, deep in the weeds. But I think education and awareness is a big piece. It's not going to solve your problem, but I think dispatchers need to be comfortable communicating with anybody on any level when they call 911.
I'm gonna completely shift gears here. There's an issue on the Colorado, Kansas border with indemnification clauses when it comes to interoperable communications. Has there been any discussion within the legislature about that issue?
Not that I'm aware of.
Could we? It's been an ongoing issue for, I would say, at least the last 10 years.
Okay, if you could get us some more information about it, then yeah, we can look into it.
Basically, the state of Colorado won't indemnify Kansas, the state of Kansas won't indemnify the state of Colorado, so we can't talk on their radio system, they can't talk on ours.
You would think it's common sense, you'd want to talk back and forth if you're just lying on the highway. But, yeah, I think we need to look into that, if that's something that would be beneficial to both states.
But I think it'll carry over. Nebraska's got a new system, state of Oklahoma's looking at some stuff, that cross-border interoperability is gonna become an issue. Not just for radio, but I think for 911, for CAT, for other things. Especially as we move to these bigger hosted type solutions and hosted systems, we need to have that conversation. And if it's not a state of Kansas issue or something that needs to be done in Colorado, do we need to push it at the federal level?
So we are able to communicate with Oklahoma and Nebraska? Or not, so none of the states, right, currently none of the states.
Even federal agencies within the state of Kansas fall into that category as well, like the FBI.
I think it's important to look into and get us some information, we'll do that.
Any other topics out there? This is a time that you kind of have some representatives out of state government that are kind of captive, so I'll go stand by the door.
Have you guys been here all day?
I
supporting or not supporting dispatchers taking on the definition, I guess, of a public safety as opposed to a secretary, and whose role that was to maybe carry that message forward, and whether or not we should fight that fight on a state level versus just let the feds do their thing. I would be curious to know how you guys feel about that, if that was to land on your doorstep, or how you feel like the state of Kansas should possibly pursue that. And if there was time, I would be interested in hearing your perspective on, if we were to take another stab at the training standards, what should we do differently?
Okay, I'll let Kyle do the training standards and I'll do the capers.
Yeah, Rick serves on the Capers committee on the Senate, so he has a lot more information about that. I've been on the 911 Coordinating Council since we started, and so when all that came up with the training standards, I think that we kind of went a direction, and then we realized that we were really going more when those that were creating the new legislation, they were really going farther than, without changing legislation, than what the current 911 Coordinating Council, what they're supposed to be doing. You guys are all employees of your individual jurisdictions, not the Coordinating Council. And so we had to be really careful that we didn't put those standards in and say, hey, the director of 911 from this county, you've got to do da-da-da-da with your dispatchers. That said, I'm not saying that there doesn't need to be some sort of standards. I think that one thought was to go to the, now I'm going to forget but it's the CPOST, thank you. Go to CPOST and say, hey, would you be willing to help us with this? That's a little bit more of a little bit more local. It's not really, but they still deal with sheriffs and a little bit more. I think that's where you would want to go I think is with CPOST. Now ultimately there may need to be some legislation, but I don't think the 911 Coordinating Council was the one that should be pushing that. Now that could change if legislation changes, but at the time we really didn't feel like that was what was needed. Now, without just really making it, we only got 30 minutes and this may really blow things up a little bit, but I have been on there for 10 years now. The 911 Coordinating Council has done a great job of creating the system that we have. We have one of the best systems in the United States. I think it's probably the most efficient for most of the counties. The counties are getting more money than they had in the past through the legislation. But there's an awful lot of work being done on a voluntary basis to keep that going. And I think eventually we're going to have, and this is a legislative issue, we're going to have the discussion, when does that all become an agency or go into an agency? I myself do not want to create a new agency, and I'm not sure I really have a good idea of where it should land in another agency. There's ideas, but none of those ideas are just really great. But I do think that oversight that the 911 Coordinating Council has, that's supposed to be there, there's a lot of volunteer, and we continue on the council, we continue to hire outside contractors basically to do different things. And I really think that we're getting close to that, where we really need to be thinking about that. And I know that doing that, one of the things we want to make sure that we're careful of is that we don't pull that dispatch away from the locals. We don't want the dispatch to feel, the people in dispatch, or even the local county commissioners or directors, to feel like that, well, the state's taking over the dispatch, because we don't want to take over the dispatch. And so that's something I think that really needs to be thought about. That's a little bit above the training standards, but it still goes to that issue that we've almost created a business a little bit through what we're doing. I'm not saying it's bad, I think it's good what we're doing, but we need to be looking at that in the future.
As a sheriff, I can tell you that the main reason that there was a huge pushback is when you guys proposed the training was the sheriffs were looking at the budget, you know, and from what we understood, that the training was to be effective immediately, and we had no money in our budgets. You know, I think probably the training is important, and I think most sheriffs recognize that. That if you propose that and, you know, push it out to where it would take a couple of years to go into effect or something, then I think that would be a little bit better for the sheriffs, because we established, you know, most of us have to submit a budget in June for the next year, and, you know, so by the time that came out the last time, our budgets were already set for the next year, and we understood it to be that these people were going to have to be going through all kinds of training that we had no money to pay for.
Sure, and I understand, and that's the reason why I say if you're gonna do something, I think CPOS needs to be kind of because, you know, the sheriffs have a lot more say over CPOS than I think also, though, through the online training center, the knowledge center, I think there's a lot of training that can be done through that, and not necessarily mandated that they, you know, have to go through that, but I think there's a lot out there available for the sheriffs and for the 911 administrators to use to get there, because everybody wants their employees to be trained effectively and efficiently, and so I think that's one way too, is to you know, look to that knowledge center a little bit more, you know. So, but yeah, we don't. I mean, I'll tell you, I was one of them that said, "Hey, let's stop the boat here. I think we're moving a little too fast on this issue." And there was, you know, your representative, the sheriff's representative on the council, you know, took it to and said, "Hey, look, we need to think about this." So, and that's a good thing about having, you know, the representation that you have on the council. So, yeah.
Sheriff, thank you for giving us your point or your position. But I can remember all the way back when we were writing the legislation or helping draft the legislation, and Senator Pat Apple said, and remind me to go back to training, he said, "We don't want to make this a business, and we do not want full-time employees." So I think the council has done a very good job about trying to do it with volunteer help. And my only concern is when we start looking down the road towards full-time staff and full-time employees, whether it be under the umbrella of an already existing agency and or the creation of a new agency, the cost to the local PSAPs will be more, I think, when we start bringing on the staff, and with it comes benefits and retirement and all of that. So I think as our direction may change as we've grown and we have to look at some of those things, I think the council did toe the line with the direction they were given by the authors of the original legislation, the original, not the modification in 2011 that took place in 2012 with the creation of the coordinating council. In that legislation, the language was that the council had the authority to adopt recommended standards. And they were recommended and adopted, I think, with a 2-year, and that was under the operations committee, which I chaired at the time. There was almost 2 years given for agencies to adopt or to meet those standards, and they were recommended. And the great thing about those is it just gave areas that they felt like were important that were addressed. And they didn't give any parameter or guidelines to the local jurisdiction under the recommended guidelines that said, how do you reach them? If you do it at home, if you create your own training, if you say, hey, within the first 40 hours, you have to talk about deaf and hard of hearing and your disabled community. If all you did was say a sentence about it and you wanted to check mark the box, it was just recommended that you go over these topics within a certain timeline of the employee's job. So I totally understand the fiscal note that you're concerned about. I don't think we did a good job of educating our centers, and I will take that on as under my responsibility of, it was recommended. There was about a year and a half or almost 2 years before it was to go in place. And it's totally up to you. Just like, hey, if you want to sit down and check mark all the boxes and you go through all these topics, that you can at least say, we cover these areas of training within our own internal program. We created syllabuses. We created support documentation for those who wanted to use it and to make it their own and grow from it. We could have done a better job. Where we're at though is, in my opinion, is we were creating a statewide solution that is leased to the local jurisdiction, and we wanted a standard level of service, county to county to county to county. So we wanted to ensure that those guidelines were provided to the PSATs as a resource. They were not developed by Kansas. They were developed with input from NENA and APCO, utilizing their standards. And then I think one thing that is that we don't talk about very often is as people went on the hosted solution, it was part of the agreement when you took the when you signed the agreement for the equipment, saying, hey, I'm going to at least have this minimum level of training. So I think as we move forward and we look at 911 operators as being professionals, changing their classification, I think that it may not be the council's responsibility, and it may be nothing that they want to take on in the future, but I definitely think APCO and NENA and any other professional organization that has 911 in its title that comes to light in the future needs to come together, and they need to ensure that they're on the same page. And that's the only way that we're going to be identified as professionals, is when we have a standard in place, whether it be recommended or mandated, and we all adopt it and start using it. Because I'm going to tell you, if I'm in Pratt, or if I'm in Hutch, or if I'm in Kansas City, and one of my family members calls 911, I want them to get the same standard of care no matter where they call. Now, we've provided the technology. We have to figure out a way that we can all come to the table and have our training standards at the very least back on a recommended level of what our minimum requirements are. And that's what they were, minimum recommended standards. And then the mandate was if you went on the hosted solution. So if I've misspoken in any way, Scott, I would hope that you would correct me. We're going to meet those, we're going to exceed those at my local center, and I hope that you guys all take the challenge at home and do the same.
I might touch on that, on the changing of credentials. Just changing credentials doesn't necessarily make a person qualified for KP&M. I spent last Monday, I'm on the Capers Oversight, which is what Kyle just mentioned. I'm the Vice Chair of Financial Institutions, Insurance, Pensions, and Benefits. And last week, we had corrections in. We had wildlife and parks, game wardens, they're all wanting to join KP&F, and there's certain qualifications that they don't meet. And for 49 years, they've been trying to get put on the KP&F. So it's not changed in 49 years. So one of the suggestions that we left with them last Monday was that maybe we look at something else. Maybe something between KP&F and standard capers. One of the big issues too on capers is that capers are still paying Social Security. If you move to KP&F, you'd still be paying Social Security. So once you start paying Social Security, you're always going to pay that. That shortens our checks, because now you're paying more for the KP&F, you're also still paying the Social Security. So there are a lot of issues involved in that. With that being said, I will tell you some good news. Last year, we had Senate Bill 9. And Senate Bill 9 made a CAPERS payment that we had missed in 2016. And in 2016, we didn't have the funds to make the payment, we didn't feel like. And we got to the end of the session, and I served on there's 3 in the House and 3 in the Senate of us that do the negotiating at the end of the session as far as trying to get an agreement between the House and the Senate. And I'm one of those that sat on that committee. And we looked at it and we weren't sure that the revenues would be large enough to go ahead and make that payment. So we said, well, we're going to wait and see what the final quarter comes in July. It came in $230 million above projections. So when we got back in January, the first thing we did was introduce Senate Bill 9, and I'm proud to be one of the co-sponsors. I carried the bill in the Senate. When we first started out, it was going to be a real battle. At the end of the day, every senator and every representative voted for it. We made that missed payment from 2016, it was $115 million. When we made that payment, it was the first time in 25 years that the required contribution was made to CAPERS. First time. So in other words, we had a mortgage on the house for 25 years, and for 25 years, we never made the payment once. Most of the time, we didn't even pay the interest. Last year, we did that. We made that first payment.
We made the payment, just not the whole payment.
Right. And Kyle and I both joined the legislature in 2011. And one of the first things that we tried to do in 2011, we looked at CAPERS. CAPERS was on the verge of bankruptcy. Terrible shape in 2011. And I'm happy to report up till 2018, 2019, I guess, right, start of 19, we put $5.1 billion into CAPERS. We are out of the bankruptcy. We're not good yet. We're still unfunded by $6.8, $6.9 billion. But we have over $20 billion in that account. And something else that I'll tell you, when that money goes into CAPERS, it cannot be touched by the governor, the legislature, or anyone. That's a lockbox.
Thank goodness.
Well, it is, but a lot of times you're reading the paper, you know, they're borrowing from CAPERS or stealing from CAPERS or however you do it. What happens is, they don't make the payments. But as far as that money that's in there, that $20 billion cannot be touched. It's invested. We did a $1 billion bond 2 years ago.
Well, 500.
I think it was 2 years ago, the last year or two. Anyway, we hit the low in the market, because there's a little lull in the stock market. We hit the low in bonds. That's working very well. Now that could change tomorrow, but so far so good. But we are funded at about 68% now. When you folks get ready to retire, that money is going to be there for you. Couldn't hardly tell you that in 2011, but I feel comfortable telling you that today. Because you folks are putting your dollars into every paycheck. Sometimes the state doesn't, and that's the problem. We had problems in 2008 with investments. You know, when the stock market went down, that hurt us a lot. But we've had a lot of years where it wasn't a priority, that the legislature didn't put in the funds that were required to be put in. Hopefully we'll stay on track. And like I said, we've worked hard to try to get that solved, and I think we're making great progress. But as far as changing, like I said, corrections was there. You know, they've been trying, all these different folks have been trying to get into KP&F, and there's some very strict rules.
Okay, that brings up a question, Representative Hoffman. If you guys choose to take that on as a topic to maybe create the Department of 911 or put it under an umbrella, what would be your position in keeping our funds separate to where they couldn't be raided or swept?
Well, I mean, my position would be, we would do everything we can to keep them separate. The problem is actually getting that to happen. Capers is different because it is a contract between the employee and the government. And so once that money's put in there, that contract keeps that money safe. Unfortunately, anything that's in the state government, and I would venture to say that if the legislature wanted to, they could probably get a hold of the money that's in the 911 Coordinating Council. All it takes is 63, 21, and 1 to 2 about anything you want to do. You know, as far as that's concerned, that's the unfortunate thing about any time we talk about a lockbox. Capers is one of the very few things that is a true lockbox, because we can't touch it because of that contract and federal law. I couldn't say the same thing about any other. Now there has been court cases in the last several years that, in fact, we paid back some money just this last year. I think it was this last year. We paid back some money of some funds that were fee funds, which this would be a fee fund. They were swept out of a I think it was the realtors. So the realtors fee fund was swept and put into the state general fund. They sued, and that money was returned this last year through a court case. So I think there's a little bit more of a precedence now because of that legislature are a lot more careful, and hopefully the governors will be a lot more careful. And this sweeping of funds is not something new. I mean, it's been happening for multiple governors, way back, 90s, But hopefully, because of that court case, that sort of an issue is a lot more void, because that is always in the back of everybody's mind whenever they start talking about, well, we can move this, we got to, there's $50 million sitting in this account. Okay, well, where did that $50 million come from? What's the parameters around it? And so I feel a lot better about funds not being swept, but I can't stand here and say that a future legislature wouldn't, because there's just nothing stopping them from doing it. I mean, it's a simple phrase within the budget that says, notwithstanding this law, we're going to do this, and that's just the way it is. So, but I would say that I'm not sure it really matters whether it's an agency or whether it's a council. If somebody really wanted to try it, now politically it would be stupid. I mean, really for someone to do it. But I'm not saying it wouldn't be tried. Several years ago, there was a fund that every county that were oil-producing counties, oil and gas-producing counties, there was a severance tax fund. I can't remember now what it was called. But every county got a certain amount of money put back into their, specifically for them, that were oil and gas counties. So Comanche County, Barber County, Harper, those are counties that I represent. Every one of them had a fund, had a certain amount of money set in there. The depletion fund, yes. It was the depletion fund. And what it was created at the beginning was that as oil and gas goes back and forth, and as it goes up, and this fund builds up, and then it crashes as it does, that fund would be there for them to not have to raise taxes because they could pull from that fund. Well, the problem was we were getting into budget situations, and there were increasingly legislators that did not have one of those funds in their district that were saying, hey, I think there was 50 or 60 million statewide in that fund. And they were starting to say, hey, maybe we should pull some of that money back. And so one of the things we did is we made it so that that money went directly, didn't stay in the state coffers, it went directly to each county, and they held it. And then eventually we changed the whole thing, and it doesn't exist anymore, but they were able to keep that money. And so we saved them. But it's always something we have to look at. Every time that, I always tell fee-funded agencies they need to really watch their fees and their buildup of their funds for two reasons. One is that it becomes something that if someone's looking for money, they go, oh, wait, there's money here we can bring to. The other thing is that is, whether you want to call it a tax or a fee, that's coming out of somebody's pocket. And if you are taxing them or assessing them more than what you need, there's no reason for that count to build up. So it needs to be used if you're gonna assess it. So
5 or 6 million? Okay.
5 or 6 million. I had a little bit long. I couldn't remember.
I have a couple comments, and I think what's important to remember is, yes, that could be a possibility. But a couple things today, I know Representative Hoffman, you weren't here earlier. But also looking at potential problem is the state diverting 911 fees, which therefore would make the state of Kansas ineligible for any federal grants. As we heard earlier today, there's 117 PSAPs. 30 PSAPs got a little bit over $3 million. So how many PSAPs that still are short funding for projects? And I'm sure there's some agencies in here that just missed the boat because that boat sailed real quick. I mean, it's like going on vacation and get back to the cruise ship. When you hear the horn, you better be on it, or else you're going to be standing at the dock waving at everybody going by. And I think that happened to, some agencies within here as well. So I think that's one thing that we need to keep in mind. But I think also as it is a 911 fee, I think it's a fee that we can directly correlate back that has a direct impact at the lowest local level. Because that's truly where those dollars are being spent across the board, is providing that standard technology level across the state so that everybody is hopefully getting the same service regardless of whether they live in the north half of the state or the south half, west or east. So with that, my other question would be is...
Well, I might just say that's a good point that I didn't bring up about the federal funds, because that is something that does make a lot of difference when people are looking at fee funds or whatever. There's a lot of times, and we've got a great legislative staff that works to help us through not only the budgetary but the legal part of it. And they'll say, if you touch this, then we're going to lose this much in federal funds. And usually that is something that gets everybody's attention. So that's a very good point. So anyway.
I forgot my...
Oh, I'm sorry.
So that's all right.
I have a couple questions in regard to the agency thing. Would you see, if it's its own entity as an agency, would you see that being a fee-funded agency? Because I know I've heard some comment around the State House that that's not the way to fund it at all, that it should just be a state general fund line item, which I don't know where the money comes from for that.
I think that the current way we fund it is a very good way of doing it. I wouldn't want to change it to a state general fund because those that are using it are paying for it. I mean, that's the way it works, and those counties that are using it more are paying for it more. So no, I wouldn't change it. And I just bring up that whole idea of the agency just for thought and just for. I'm not seeing anything happening very quickly on that, but I personally don't want to create a new agency. I'm not looking at that, but I do think that. The point was made. We've had some very good volunteers. We continue to have some very good volunteers. But can we continue to rely on that going into the future? Everybody's time is worth something.
And my second question in regard to that, if it wasn't a standalone agency, where would you see it potentially fitting?
I've heard highway patrol, I've heard the adjutant general's office, the emergency management, which is kind of the emergency management office, KBI, you know, maybe. I mean, I think it'd have to be something in that, but maybe even Seapost, which isn't necessarily an agency, but maybe they could be the one that take. I don't know, and that's the thing. I really don't have a really good idea of where. I mean, the cleanest thing would be to create a new agency, but then you really do get into the costs, as Michelle was saying. You create a new agency, now all of a sudden you got a secretary, you got to have an undersecretary, and you get into the situation, HR and all that, and
finance,
you know, and you get into the old situation where you hear the joke about the federal government hiring the security guard to guard a few warheads. Well, then he can't do it the whole time, so we hire someone else. Well, now all of a sudden we got 2 employees. We got to have somebody else to supervise those 2 employees. Well, now we've got somebody's got to supervise that employee, and you get 4, 5, 6 employees, and then all of a sudden you get into a crunch time of, well, we don't have enough money. Well, who gets fired? It's the first guard, that was supposed to be guarding the stuff in the first place. So I don't want to create a new agency. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying we do need to look at it, I think, and see. And it may be just changing the way that the 911 council operates too. I don't know.
Thank you.
Who doesn't want to touch you?
No, it's not that I don't touch it, but there's really no simple answer. I mean, at some point in time, things will change, and how that'll go, I don't know. But I do believe it should stay defunded, and because SGF has too much strain on the way it is, and that money is always, pretty good. So I think the fee fund would definitely be the way to go, is what Kyle said.
I do want to say that I think statewide, we have the best solution for the least cost. Our collaboration statewide has happened, but I still look at the local side, and I see that I have a $1.3 million budget locally and about $300,000 coming in from the fee. And I think even as efficient as the system is, it's a turnkey solution, right? It comes with project management and all of that. We still, the local budget and the fee fund provide the service way less than almost any state out there. So I just wanted to leave that conversation with that, because when we look at the other states and what they're charging per device on that fee, there's some that are up there over $2 per device, and we're way under that.
Kansas has done a great job, all of you folks are. And I mentioned that early on, and that's why Kyle and I are very proud to support all of you.
And a lot of those other states don't have near as good of a system as what we have. Yeah, I'll agree that we just, what's been put in place is very, and it's not only just helping 911 dispatchers and law enforcement, but because of the mapping system that we've created. That mapping system is available to all kinds of different government entities, and so that's something that I think it's brought the whole state, instead of having all this patchwork of maps and GIS, that it's brought the whole state into one good picture. So.
Speaking of thinking, it's not necessarily a legislative thing, but, in my community, Google is using maps from 20 years ago. And, and so, well, for instance, we needed to send an ambulance to my mom's house because she went down and needed help. And I was in the office and I just told the dispatcher the address to go to. Well, you know, EMS, they Google it, and it come out southeast of Lincoln when I live west of Lincoln. And when they go flying by in the ambulance, I call on the radio and say, "You're going to my house. You're going the wrong direction." And why can't this mapping be shared with Google?
The old mappings are, aren't they?
Eileen?
Well, great question.
That's right.
But it can be. So under the MOU you all signed, your PSAP signed with the council, is that the data is your data. So we won't put it out for public distribution or distribute it without your permission. But we get this question a lot. People saying, well, okay, I've got this great data now, but Google still has old data, or TomTom, or name your navigation device, because we all use our cell phones to navigate ourselves places. So we would like to act as kind of your facilitator to distribute that data, and that's why you occasionally get those data requests from the portal. Like a company will submit a request and say, hey, I'd love to get updated data for our navigation device, or for the one-call system, or whoever it might be. And so we really like to encourage everyone to actually approve those requests, or even maybe eventually start talking about if we should make this data public domain, because it is used, as Representative Hoffman said, statewide so much now. So we have so many state agencies that use the data to more accurately locate their facilities or their infrastructure, to better, KDOT uses it for routing and improving their system. So I could put a whole case study together for you about what all this data is used for. And so yeah, I think we need to start talking more about it, and then maybe we will maybe be a little more proactive of distributing the data to them versus waiting for them to ask for it. So.
I'd like to comment along those lines. Hopefully everyone can hear me. My county commission has elected that to send people out to get that data and do that mapping and do those surveys costs money. And so we do have a service that people can purchase that will give them all that updated parcel address points, road center lines, all the GIS data we have. But they have elected that it does cost the county money to do that. And so those burdens are borne solely by the county. So we deny all those requests based off of that, based on the fact we do have a subscription and a fee for service that those private entities can access that data, but they do need to pay for it. They do need to reimburse the county for the time and energy that was spent on that. And we have a lot of companies that have elected to do that. So I think there's a little bit of pushback on that where, hey, having these good maps and having these good GIS people and personnel, and I would put ours up, among the best. There's several counties that do a really excellent job with that. We don't really want to give that away for free.
Yeah.
I'm between these two guys right now, so I agree with both of them, but unless we get the data released out, Google's never going to find it. Google's not going to contact us and ask us. So by giving it out to other agencies, they probably snag it. My only question is, can there be a clause put in there that, okay, I approve so-and-so company, that they cannot sell it? Can we give them, can there be a clause be put in there that I'm giving you my data, but it is illegal for you to sell it?
That gets into legal. So maybe, but I think we talked about, this came up at the APCO conference, actually, in a discussion we had with a lot of our data maintainers on how can we better distribute that data, maybe have some local control
And to follow up on that just a little bit, I think if you look at the Kansas Open Records Act and the Attorney General's opinions that support that, I think you can charge a fee for reproducing the data, but I don't think you can charge a fee for creating the data. So whatever it costs you to copy the data is what you can charge, is my understanding under the Open Records Act. So if you're doing more than that, I would encourage you to have your legal counsel take a look at Cora and supporting Attorney General's opinions.
And our fees reflect that.
Yeah.
Question or?
Well, I was just gonna suggest, on the page where you deny, giving them that data, maybe have a line in there that you can put why we're denying it, so that you can give that back to them.
Sure, that's a good idea. Okay, so that's good input, because it is varied. It might be a local agreement you want them to sign, it might be a budget purpose, it might be, county commissioner's decision, whatever. That's a good idea. Thanks for the discussion, sorry. I was like, ooh, GIS, I got up in here.
All right, well, if that's it, thank you so much for your time. And I want to apologize, I said representative earlier, Senator.
He used to be a representative. Thank you.